is about the tier 2 and the issues that people believe that are had with tier 2 rugby. Is tier 2 rugby over? Is tier 2 rugby over? Now, man, a lot came after the announcement with the Nations Cup. We talked about it last week. All right. Nations Cup, obviously the top 12 teams, the Six Nations teams, the Rugby Championships teams, plus Fiji and Japan compete in the Nations Cup Tier 1. There'll be no relegation for a minimum 6 years. Tier 2, the U.S. will have a chance to go through Tier 2, going through the Pacific Nations Cup. That involves Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, and including now Japan, Canada, and the USA, which ironically, the USA getting a chance to play Japan will be the one chance that they'll get a chance to play a tier 1 team, quote, quote, for the better part of the next 6 years. So it's definitely an interesting whole situation, but it was lost with a lot of vitriol that went along with it. And it goes back to what I want to say about TMO, and I'm going to keep teasing that TMO because TMO's trash. But my issue came in a lot of the response. Now, this person, tier 2 rugby, this account is probably one of the dopest accounts, one of the biggest supporters of tier 2 rugby in the world. I honestly think they're the only ones that follow specifically tier 2 rugby to the closest extent. And we're talking about across the board. They follow from the local side. I know they've shared a lot of my content. So this is not me shitting on tier 2 rugby, T2 rugby on X. Definitely check them out. My issue is the mindset. All right. It is the absolute mindset and a little bit of defeatist. And he was just the example that was found, but he was not the only because I don't know who they are. They were the example that was found, but they're not the only one that has been saying this. And what tier 2 rugby had tweeted out was it's going to be much harder to care much about so-called tier 2 rugby and sell it as a fan from now on. Always had faint hopes it could improve, but now chances of increased global competitiveness has been confirmed, held back basically for decades, if not more. So what is the point? And for me, like I couldn't get with this one. I couldn't get with this sentiment here. Like tier 2 is over. Tier 2 is done because of the fact that we're blocked out of the tier 1. No tier 2 nations really are going to be able to play a full tier 1 nation for at minimum 6 years in test rugby. You know, obviously teams that have players that play in the professional league will be able to play with tier 1 players, but those tier 2 nations will not have absolutely will not have a chance in the new international test window to be able to do it. But for me, I think this is a real big positive for tier 2. I genuinely think this is a positive, and here's why. When it comes to tier 1, I think there's been a very strong lockhold over the idea of how rugby has grown. I speak in a bit in terms of the way that people talked about the 7-1 bench for South Africa. Basically, it being such a disruption to the concept and the morality and the ethics and the way that rugby is being played that you should not be doing this and it should not be allowed. To the fact that people wanted to be able to outlaw it. It's almost reminiscent, if you're in the U.S., to the Eagles and the tush push, which is a play that the Eagles do that is almost, they want to liken it to a maul in essence. But like it's considered this unbeatable play that the Eagles have because they found a way to master play. When it comes to tier 1 and tier 2s, I think there's been such a way that tier 2 nations have felt that there's no choice but to try and follow in the footsteps of those that are, in essence, far more qualified at winning top level games as it is with the tier 1s. And why wouldn't you? Of course, they're consistently beating and winning, and they've been doing this for literally 100 years. So why not try and follow their model? And my argument for that is I don't think that the tier 1 models work for a newly developed or a modern era starting rugby environment. So if your rugby program's really kicked off around the 1960s, 1980s, 1990s, even more recently, early 2000s, and to today, you can't use tier 1 concepts. Like tier one have culturally preset concepts that are in New Zealand that have been playing for hundreds of years, and they basically have like a limited amount of resources in terms of population, in terms of things to do in there. You can't follow it in like England because they're not only the originators of rugby, but they've also been playing this for literally the 100+ year, almost 200 years. France is the same way, where you have all these access points where they created a bubble in and of itself by means of being able to start. So you're not learning how to evolve the game. You're not learning how to start up. It's like trying to compete against a corporation. It's like trying to do a small business and using corporate tactics to be able to build your business. It doesn't work. There's too much longevity. But the unfortunate part is tier twos don't have much. You don't typically have the coaching. You don't typically have the audience. You don't typically have the resources financially because you don't have the audience. You don't have the coaches. And the players usually start later. So you have to come with a different model. And I think disassociating from the tier ones is going to force a mechanism for those tier twos to actually have to remember that they're doing guerrilla style development in rugby. For example, whenever American football was kicking off and really starting to reach its spot, in that point, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, when they were really trying to turn up the game. When you got cats, when you got pets, when they were turning up the game, baseball at that time was the definitive number one sport, and it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. Even though we got a lot of heyday stuff, and people can talk about what the NFL was like in the early 90s, 80s, 70s, it really was like the second tier sport and kind of bordering on third tier at that point in time, because in the 90s, Michael Jordan shot the NBA up to levels that were like unimaginable. They've never been reached by the NBA like that again. And like I said, baseball was number one. So what was NFL, what was football doing? Yes, they had at least the collegiate end and being able to have that kind of history in it. But from a professional standpoint, it was still like not kicking. So what did they do? They changed the programming. And I know a lot of Americans will know this if they are paying attention. What are some of the favorite movies that we had whenever we were young? Little Giants, Remember the Titans, Any Given Sunday. And then on top of that, you'd have little cartoons. I remember one, you got to go back. I'm a 90s kid, so all my cartoons are from the 90s. There was something called A Night in King Arthur's Court. It was King Arthur and the Round Table. It was an action film. And what it basically was that Merlin in the place where King Arthur was, I don't know why I forgot the name, but Merlin was trying to be able to find his new King Arthur, and after the one that was defeated, he opened up his magic and found a bunch of football players and brought them into the realm. And then the captain of the football team ended up being King Arthur, and his football squad ended up being the Knights of the Round Table. This seems like it's very innocuous, but it wasn't. What it did was it implemented the seed of football into our young minds as kids. Then we started seeing football mentioned in movies, in Looney Tunes, in just basic stuff everywhere, constantly. Thank you, Brandon. Camelot. Thank you. My boy Brandon coming in with the winner, Camelot, for King Arthur and the Round Table. But essentially, we started inoculating into our minds. And so some of our favorite football movies, easy to go. Varsity Blues, Any Given Sunday, Remember the Titans, that almost got an award. And it makes it easier. So then whenever the late 90s come and suddenly the heyday of football starts to increase, now you have a bunch of kids who already know. They might not have been watching it, but they already know about football. Add to that the Super Bowl, and you're creating that to be more an event. The halftime show, you're creating that to make it more of an event. And then now the increase of the talk about the draft increases our attention. And now we're watching people go from, well, I played in high school or in middle school because I watched it and I didn't even know I wanted to play, but I felt like everybody's playing because everywhere I'm going to seems to show me that football is number one everywhere you go. And don't get me wrong, other sports were doing it. MLB, we did buku baseball movies, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, which are things that help lead to baseball's rise. But if football really started killing it in the late 90s and 2000s, being it and inoculates in. And if you assume, which is how we normally go as humans, a semi-FOMO effect, everybody's playing. This is the way that you normally go. This is how it's done. Oh, you have adults to be able to confirm their time playing. Oh, you have other friends of yours that are like, oh, I played. Then you have your league that shows, oh man, I can be on the big screen. I can be on TV. I can make money. But it all starts as a cycle. That is how you start to recreate your development. And it starts in that point. And tier 2, I think, needs to jump back to remember that they need to start from that ground level and then move up. There's such a hype about trying to get commercialization at the top, but you've done nothing to be able to build your fan base. And you add, like, in one programming, again, I always like to use Mr. George Hook because he speaks a lot of truths because he's been in the game for a long time. If you don't know, George Hook is an Irish former rugby player, coach, broadcaster, freaking legend overall. And he was saying, he was like, another issue is that tier 1s have all the resources. They have the money. But the funny fact of it all, most of the money that goes from tier 1 rugby teams come from tier 2 countries. Adidas, Germany, tier 2. Nike, USA, Land Rover, USA, Jeep, USA. Like, it's tier 2 resources matriculating over to tier 1 countries because they've done the stuff to be able to have the generational, cultural, quasi-organic build of an audience that just simply has to accept it, and hence they're also setting the rules. Don't follow those rules. And I think this is where tier 2 absolutely ends up getting the advantage. If they can absolutely go back to the drawing board, and for the USA, we're looking at 2031 to be able to make this happen. Well, hey, we start doing our programming now, down low, to get that audience base. And you hit them at each level. It's a Disney programming. Perfect example. Disney catches us from the age 0 until we're adults. How? They start us off with Disney cartoons as kids, whether it's things like Land Before Time, or then you go to the movies and you get like the Aladdins and the Beauties and the Beasts. And that works more so whenever you're like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then once you start transitioning into teenage, oh man, now you have Disney Channel shows. You have all these teens that you start to watch as you're a kid. And then what also works is that you get to watch them grow up, and Disney sends them through the funnel to help you gravitate yourself as an adult all the way up to the top, to suddenly you are now watching the major movies, Marvels, now Star Wars. Whenever it was Touchstone, you'd have the adult movies of Touchstone. Now ESPN and basically sports as an adult has you locked in, and you've been in the funnel from day one, right out the womb. And then, of course, the parks become the live events that allow you to be tangibly there, which is what we do with our games. Then the word of mouth allows them to be able to bring more people in, because that's how we work with our youth rugby. Hey, I recommend this. We build these factors here and there. And all of a sudden now you have a consistent flow going through. But it's not just simply, yo, let's do a camp. Yo, let's do let's build our pro team, and let's see if we can monetize in a trickle-down effect. It starts with the kid, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to play. It means that you need them to be able to be viewing the sport, and it allows it to be now an industry as opposed to just a club. And it doesn't make the usage of money as an evil. And once again, Brandon coming in with it. He talks about, my kids watch Bluey, which is Australian. Absolutely. And this is one that I did. And they've never watched football. And that should be interesting. And that is one thing what I'm saying. These cartoons, these kid shows, these elements are one layer that adds to the propaganda of getting people into the sport. That's where tier 2 really has to be able to play their heaviest game. You played a propaganda game. And now that you have social media, of course, we got guys that are from the adult side that will definitely do, skits and parodies talking about Sam Rugby loves rugby. Even myself, I tend to gravitate more towards the adult side as I'm working back down to the kids side. Fast forward, not to be creepy, but you have it with Squidgy, but from that all works from the adult side, and it makes sense because especially in tier twos, most people enter in their adult years, but that's not how you win the game. That's not how you're winning the game. You need to bring those resources back, and that's whenever those resources that have been going to tier one, they now stay at home. And when I tell you that those tier one resources are so necessary, because those tier ones are hurting right now because they don't have the population, they don't have the financial resource. Of course, ours RFU definitely is rich, but New Zealand isn't. Australia is falling apart and going into shambles. South Africa has to be able to start working into the URC because they don't have the population or the economy that is sustainable enough for them to hold on their own. That's why they had to leave the Super Rugby League. I mean, they can say it's because the time zone changed, but they were in that for like a decade, almost 20 years, because the money over at Sky Sports is better, and they need to do it because they don't have the population to sustain it. France is doing their thing, but even in there, they're still a third tier sport, definitely behind basketball and soccer, easily. Same with England, which is more soccer and cricket, easily within that. And Wales is too small to be able to sustain it on their own. Ireland can't do it. You're talking about a population of 8 million people. Like it doesn't work. So the gripe ultimately that there is a defeatist nature, that tier two no longer can continue on because tier one isn't. And you know who's a great example of showing that is absolute BS is Argentina. Argentina is an economically deficient country that has somehow managed to be top of the tier in both soccer, which is clearly number one, and they won their World Cup, and basketball and rugby. And they've managed. And what was the secret that they even used? They sent their guys over to the professional league, steal the lessons, get the experience, and bring that back home. Now, mind you, they might not be getting to they might not be winning Rugby World Cups, but honestly, it's only been like 4 people who have won a Rugby World Cup, so it doesn't really say anything in 34 years, 35 years, only 4 people have won a Rugby World Cup, so that doesn't even mean anything. The fact that Argentina have been in the semifinals twice, they made it to quarterfinals, and they technically don't have the resources, nor are they receiving venture capital money either. So it's like, it can be done. There's no reason at all that we as a tier 2 nation should ever feel some type of way that we're not going to be able to compete or manage or do what we need to do in that fashion. So it was just something that really hurt my heart to be able to see people do it. And then it pissed me off because I was like, you're a competitor. You're a competitor. Fans don't come because of tier 1 nation. Ain't nobody in the US really know anybody else at the tier 1. The All Blacks did because they have a brand and they do the haka. Other than that, ain't nobody really give a crap about it. But you can make them give a crap in your own country if you get it done in a manner that actually functionally creates it. Invictus showed that people will actually watch it, and it almost got an award. That is the propaganda that you're trying to do, but you got to do it from the bottom up. But let me know what you guys think. I know I went on long. I don't care. This is what the point of this is. Let me know what you guys think about this. Let me know what your feelings are on the changes that happened with the Nations Cup and where you feel tier 2s. And hey, if I'm wrong, let me know what the significance is that a tier 2 must play a tier 1 as opposed to being able to play tier 1 players in other facets. You let me know, because I'm okay. I'm willing to learn, but I haven't felt like the proof has been shown to be absolutely necessary to do that outside of being able to scope their talent. Like I don't feel like teams learn that much from 100 to 10 butt whooping, a 70 to 6 butt whooping. I don't feel like a tier 2 nation actually learns that much as a result from it. But playing alongside tier 1 players, that does make a difference. Playing alongside. So, you get your professional league or you go there, that makes a change. And that hasn't been bubbled out. So there. All right, y'all. All right. Let's get to another ad real quick. And when I get back, we're gonna talk the TMO situation. We're gonna talk Eddie Jones going to Japan, and also this new proposal, possibly, of a British Lions Super League. So we'll be right back with more.
Anybody say I can't